If you had driven past Caldwell's Fix-It on a Tuesday afternoon in our little Midwestern town, you would have seen a cinder block building the color of wet gravel, a hand-painted sign, and a porch bench rubbed smooth by the backs of people who sat there to wait or to work up the nerve to ask for help. You would have smelled oil, cut grass, and a trace of coffee that always seemed to be burning. Even in July, you would have thought it was the kind of place that repaired screens and replaced mower belts and kept old radios alive. And you would have been right. Except that the stories people told about the place stretched further than the smell of that coffee. And further than truth liked to stretch in our county. The man behind the counter was named Mason Caldwell. Everyone called him Mason. He had the easy good cheer of a hardware store clerk and the hands of someone who believed there was no such thing as throwaway. He wore the same faded work shirt in every season. And he laughed with his whole chest. It is important you understand this. He did not look like a strange man. He looked like the kind of man who knows which bolt you need before you finish describing the rattle. I first met Mason when I was 9 and the chain on my used bike had become a wad of metal wire. My parents, Roberta and Leon Price, brought me to the shop and spoke in the private tone of people who hoped to be told they were foolish for worrying. Mason lifted the bike with one hand, spun the wheel with the other, and nodded to himself like a doctor listening to a heartbeat. He told us to come back in 2 days. When we did, the bike was not only fixed, it was tuned. The brakes caught at the precise point where I liked them. The seat was at the exact height where my legs could extend without reaching. I asked how he did it. I had always wanted to know how things fit together. I suppose some children collect stones. I collected explanations. His answer felt like an explanation that could carry me all the way to the horizon. Every mechanism is parts, he told me, and he reached for a small brass clock that sat beside the register. He opened the back. Inside the clock was a world that looked like a town in miniature. Gears and springs, teeth and pins, balance and friction. He plucked out a spring that had a bend where no bend should be and let it quiver in his palm. You find what is bent or broken. You fix it. Or, if you cannot fix it, you replace it. Then you put the world back together in the correct order and it runs. He showed me this with the clock. And I stood there with my mouth open in a way I did not think was possible for someone my age. He laughed the way uncles laugh when a magic trick lands. I started spending Saturdays at Caldwell's Fix-It because my parents believed in good influences and because Mason never sent me away. When business was slow, he would teach me the names of tools, and then the names of diagrams, and then the names of invisible things like resistance and torque. He gave me a stack of his old paperbacks, spines cracked and margins underlined. A few were about radios, a few about early American inventors, and more than a few about mathematics, a subject I had not yet learned to fear. It is not an exaggeration to say that those Saturdays welded themselves to my sense of what the world could be. It is also not an exaggeration to say that everything changed because of a cat. The cat belonged to a boy named Hunter. I remember that because Hunter cried the way a person cries when the sound is pulled straight from the lungs. The animal had been hit by something or stepped on, and one of its back legs had a wrong shape. Hunter's mother did not know what to do. We had a farmer's co-op, 2 diners, and a clinic that did not see animals. The nearest vet was 20 miles down the highway and closed on weekends. Mason told the boy he would take care of it. He said the same words he had said about my bike. 2 days. I asked if he was going to drive the cat to the vet. He laughed as if I had suggested sending it to the moon. He told me not everything required a specialist if you had patience, knowledge, and clean hands. I told him animals were different. He told me everything that moves is a machine in one way or another. He said bones and joints obeyed principles before they obeyed names. Then he carried the cat through a door at the back of the shop. A door I had never seen open. A door I thought was a closet. He saw me angle toward it, and he put his arm out. "No, Evan," He said, "This is a workspace. It is not safe." He smiled and turned the lock. 2 days later, the cat slept on the bench, legs tucked beneath it, purring like a small motor. Hunter came back with his mother, and the boy's relief was so obvious that I felt it in my own chest. The cat stood, stretched, tested the leg, and then rubbed itself against the corner of the bench as if it had never known pain. Hunter cried different tears, and Mason shrugged like a man who had changed a belt and nothing more. Word traveled in our town the way heat travels from a stove. Quietly, efficiently, and without permission. People began bringing pets with a limp or a cough. They also brought him things that had never belonged in a repair shop. A doll that would not close its eyes when laid down. A music box that played a lullaby at double speed. A snow globe in which the flakes would not fall. He fixed them all. I never saw him turn anyone away. On those Saturdays, I learned something else. The back room stayed locked. In the middle of a July so hot that the road shimmered. A couple pulled up in a maroon sedan and the tires squealed. The woman had a blunt haircut and the expression people wear when the bottom of the world drops out. The man ran around to the back and lifted a girl from the seat. The girl's arms fell with the weight of sleep, but her eyes did not follow anything, and her skin had the color of the inside of an envelope. The woman begged Mason to do it again. She repeated the word again until it felt like the only word left. From the shape of her mouth, I understood that the accident had happened at the crosswalk in front of the courthouse. Someone had not seen a small figure run back for something that mattered only to the small. Mason looked at me and told me to go home. He had never told me to go home. I did not move. He raised his voice. I had never heard that either. I left. Do not make me explain how a child decides that a thing is true when every adult insists it is impossible. Some conclusions arrive like weather. I knew the parents had brought the girl to Mason because they believed he could fix her. I also knew that no one I had ever met could fix a thing like that. 2 days later, a girl sat on the bench with a loose ponytail and a paper cup of water. The girl told me her name was Lily Garner. She held out her hand, and her palm was warm. She told me she liked her cat. She told me she liked grape popsicles. She smiled with clean white teeth as if the world had been polished for her. The smile was perfect in the way a display model is perfect. Mason called me inside and asked me not to talk to her about what had happened. He said it would be too frightening to remember so soon. He said this in the tone people use with a boy they trust to behave. And he must have seen something in my eyes because he added, "Please." He reached for a prop to explain himself. A bolt. A belt. A transistor. In that second I slipped around him, put my palm on the backroom door, and pressed the handle. The latch gave way with a sound I still hear when the house is very quiet. The room behind the door did not belong to our county. It was bright, white, and strange. There were surfaces that leaned toward you and shells of clear containers. There were cables gathered into colored bundles and glass tanks with hoses that made a soft hum. I smelled antiseptic and the cool metallic breath of machines. The surfaces were clean to a kind of cleanliness that made you understand the difference between sterile and pure. On a central table lay a shape beneath a sheet. The shape was small, the way childhood is small. I reached, pinched the corner between my thumb and forefinger, and pulled. The sheet slid with almost no sound. I saw an arm so pale it looked sculpted. I saw the line of a shoulder. I saw a face. At first my brain refused to put a name to the face, because names are what make faces belong to life. Then my brain obeyed me, and I knew whose face it was. I did not finish pulling the sheet. Mason pulled me back into the shop and closed the door and turned me around. He was angry in a way I had never seen. Beneath the anger I saw something else. Grief. What do you do when a thing is broken beyond repair? He asked. You replace the parts you cannot fix. If all the parts that matter are ruined, you replace the whole. I walked out of the shop and the heat hit me like a hand. The girl on the bench smiled at me. Her eyes shone with a clarity that asked for trust and offered none in return. I did not speak to her. I did not go back to Caldwell's Fix-It for the rest of that summer. Then for the rest of the next year. Then, as it turned out, for the rest of my childhood. When I finished high school, I left for a larger city and for a college that had more buildings than our town had houses. I chose an engineering major because I had been given a stack of paperbacks when I was 9, and because I still believed that explanations could carry a person across any river. I put distance between myself and the bench and the locked door. I told myself distance was the same as safety. You can move a body to a city. You cannot always move a mind. I visited my parents the fall after my freshman year. My father had taken to barbecuing even when the weather told him not to, and my mother had taken to keeping photographs in albums instead of shoeboxes. After supper, with the house quiet and the sky black enough to show off stars, I pulled down a row of albums and sat cross-legged on the living room rug to see who I had been. I used to do this as a boy, turning pages to watch my hair grow and my teeth change. The feeling is like watching a time-lapse of your own face. An album from the year I turned 8 was thinner than the rest. The pictures skipped from snow melting at the curb to Halloween masks. I asked my mother about it the next morning. She told me I had been very sick that year. In and out of the hospital. She spoke too quickly. My mother is not good at lying and never has been. When I asked what kind of sick, she told me again that I had been in the hospital and that it had been a scary time and that she had thrown away the photographs because they upset her. She did not look at me while she said this. I tried to remember any hospital. I could not. What I remembered were objects. The smell of oil. The sound of machines that do not ask permission to be loud. The feel of sunlight on a bench that had been worn smooth by people who needed something. The grain of the wood telling stories of backs and elbows. Memory is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a key that turns in a lock you did not realize you were carrying. When the key turned, I saw myself sitting on a bench. I saw a door with frosted glass. I saw my parents running toward me with relief pouring off their faces as if relief were a physical thing. Heavy and warm. It was not a hospital. It was a cinder block building the color of wet gravel. I was looking out at them from the bench at Caldwell's Fix-It. I returned to town 2 weeks later under the pretense of a home football game. I drove past Mason's place at dusk. The sign was still there, hand-painted and fading. The porch light burned yellow. The bench waited with the patience of wood. The door at the back was closed. I parked at the grocery store and walked back along the sidewalk because I did not trust myself to pull into the lot and knock. A woman came out as I approached, holding a toaster as if it were a baby. She saw me glance at the bench and smiled. She said he had fixed a wristwatch that had not ticked in 15 years. She said it had belonged to her father and that when it ticked again, she felt a part of the world click back into the place where it belonged. She said this as a compliment to the universe, not to the man. I asked if Mason was still there most days. She said he was always there. I stood in front of the door. I was a grown man with a student ID and the keys to a dusty sedan, and my hand shook when I reached for the knob. The bell over the door made the same small sound it had made for a decade. Mason looked older by the amount a person should look older. He did not pretend he did not know me. He said my name and came around the counter. He hugged me the way a man hugs a boy he had once taught to set a ratchet and to listen for the first cough of a small engine. He asked about my parents. I asked about business. He asked about my classes. I asked about the clock with the brass back. He reached under the counter and set it on the glass. It still ran. It ran with the precise imprecision of all clocks, which is to say it was both right and wrong depending on what you needed from it. I asked him how he had learned to fix so many things. He told me the same thing he had told me when I was 9. He told me that the world is parts, that the trick is not only knowing the names of the parts, but knowing how each one fits with the others. He said repair is a kind of mercy. I told him I remembered a bench. I told him I remembered the door with the frosted glass. I told him I remembered my parents running as if they had been held underwater for a long time. I told him I found an album that was thinner than the rest. I told him I remembered nothing of hospitals. He set the clock down softly so it would not skip. He did not speak for a time that could be measured either as a long minute or a short hour. He told me that when things break, sometimes you fix the bent part, and sometimes you replace the part, and sometimes you strip the entire thing to the frame and build back. He said this as if it were scripture on a page he had memorized. I asked him if he had ever built back a person. He did not answer. I asked him if I was the same boy who used to sweep the shop for pocket change. He looked at my hands as if a truth might be written there and said, "You are the person I talked to on all those Saturdays." I asked him about Lily Garner. He said her family moved 2 towns over. He said she did well in school and joined choir and learned to make bread from her grandmother, and that she brought him a loaf once that was still warm. He told me she had a scar that looked like a zipper, but not where anyone would see it. He told me she laughed at jokes. He told me she had a favorite color and that sometimes it was purple and sometimes it changed. I realized then that the question that had lodged in me like a splinter was not whether Lily was alive. It was whether the thing that laughed when she laughed was the thing that had been hit by the car. There is a simple way to make a complex problem sound like a toy. You replace the word who with the word what. I do not recommend it for anything you love. I returned to school after that weekend and threw myself into circuits and proofs because there are rooms in the world where every variable can be named. But I kept thinking about the bench and the photographs and the missing chapter in my life. And when you think that much about a door, it sometimes opens. I drove back again on a Friday, and this time I did not sneak or stall. I asked Mason to show me the back room. He looked at me as if I were asking him to open up his chest and let me see his heart beat. He told me it was not that simple. He told me he protected that room not because it was a secret, but because it was the only place he could be honest. He told me that once some doors are open, the air changes in a way that never goes back. I told him I was prepared to live in that new air. He studied my face and must have decided I was. He took a key from a pegboard and placed it in the lock with the same care he would place a needle into a groove. The door clicked and the room smelled the way I remembered, which is to say it smelled like nothing. He flipped a switch and the lights brightened slowly as if waking. What I saw then is not something I can inventory without making it smaller or stranger than it was. I saw machines for imaging the inside of objects. I saw tools meant to slice very precisely and to seal even more precisely. I saw a wall of drawers labeled in handwriting so exact it could have been stenciled. I saw containers filled with bone screws the size of grains of rice. I saw batteries the width of a fingernail. I saw a bench where a circuit as small as a postage stamp glimmered with dots of solder that caught the light. On a shelf were jars of what looked like white thread. Mason told me they were sutures that dissolve at a rate determined by the body's own chemistry. On another shelf were cases of valves that resembled trumpet parts and valves that looked like the only thing keeping the world from flooding. He opened a cabinet, and there lay something like a child's model spine. Except it was neither plastic nor steel. It was a composite I had only read about in a paper. I asked where he had gotten it. He said he built it one night while the town slept. I asked a question that had waited 10 years to be asked. Did you ever replace an entire person? He ran his palm along the edge of the bench and told me that the word replace is the wrong shape. He said he had learned how to make a person more themselves when parts failed. He said if you built back everything at once you would not get the same person because people are not the sum of their parts. They are the history of those parts coming to know one another. He said the only way to keep a person is to make changes in the same tempo the person was already living, and that sometimes the only merciful tempo was fast. He said these sentences the way a man confesses without asking for forgiveness. I asked him if he had ever made a mistake. He said he had made 1,000, and that most of them involved waiting too long or not long enough. I asked him if he had ever told anyone what he did in this room. He said he told people every day. He said broken beyond repair were the only words they did not hear. I asked him if I had ever been brought through the door. He looked past me, toward the front of the shop, as if he could see through walls. He asked me what answer I could live with. I told him the truth. He said then that I had been a sick child for a season and that he had fixed a part of me even though the part had no common name. He said the part was not visible in photographs. He said the part had been misaligned and misfiring and that my parents had been given a choice. He said they chose repair because parents will move planets for their children when they can. I asked what he had changed. He told me that if I listened closely, I could hear a click every once in a while when I lay down to sleep. He said it would be faint. He said it would be the sound of a thing designed to last a lifetime, remembering to do its job. He told me it did not make me less me. He said I had grown over and around it, and that identity is not a bone you can set, but a vine that finds its way regardless of fences. I did not cry. I thought I might. I felt the pressure in my chest I feel when a long proof resolves. Not joy. Exactly. Not relief. The sensation is closer to recalibration. I walked outside and sat on the bench. The wood remembered my back. The town moved in the slow way towns move on a Friday. Someone drove by and waved with 2 fingers off the steering wheel. Someone else carried a box of donuts into the shop next door. Mason sat beside me. We faced the street like men who had already said the thing that needed saying and did not intend to say it twice. A boy I did not know came trudging down the sidewalk with a dog that favored its front left paw. The boy looked at the sign, then at us. He asked if this was the place. Mason told him it was. The boy asked if he could help his dog. Mason told him to sit, to breathe, to tell him what had happened. The boy did. Mason listened. The boy's words slowed as if he had borrowed Mason's calm. After the boy finished, Mason nodded and led the dog gently inside. And the boy sat where I had sat so many times and learned the hard first lesson of repair, which is to wait. I watched the door close and I thought about mercy. I thought about the men I had seen grow cruel when they felt helpless. I thought about the women in our town who lifted furniture when floodwater rose, whose hands knew where to press when a rib broke. I thought about Lily's smile and about the relief that can make a father look like his own son. I thought about the ways we justify the things we do to one another when we call them kindness. I thought about the long, thin line between saving and replacing. I thought about what it means to live in a body and what it means to love someone who lives in a body and what you will allow to be changed and what you will not. The door opened. The dog came out with a neat bandage and a tired wag. The boy thanked Mason with a formality that suggested his mother had taught him to look a person in the eye. Mason nodded. The boy walked away. The dog limped less. I turned to Mason and told him that I did not plan to tell anyone what I had seen. He surprised me by shaking his head. He said it would not matter if I did. He said the town already knew and had known for years and had made a bargain with itself. He said the bargain was this: if something is broken and a man can fix it, we will not ask how. We will call it a miracle when it is comforting and a sin when it is not. And we will never admit that those words change only when the person being fixed is ours. He looked at his hands, scarred and steady. He said, I am not proud of everything I have done. I am proud I have not turned away. I asked him what would happen when he was gone. He told me he had written things down. But that words are not enough. He said the only way to pass on this kind of work is the way anyone passes on a craft. One hand to another. I realized he was watching me as he said this. I told him I did not know if I wanted the responsibility of deciding who to save and how. He told me that is the only honest answer. I drove back to the city with the window down even though the air carried the sharp promise of cold. I lay awake that night and listened for a click. I did not hear it, But then again, I may have. The sound inside your own body is not a thing you can swear to in the morning. I wrote a long email to my parents and deleted it. I wrote a shorter one and sent it. It said only that I knew I had been loved and that I was glad they had chosen as they had chosen. My mother called the next day and asked me if I wanted the album back. I told her to keep it. She said it had never been gone. Weeks later, between classes, I looked up Lily Garner. There was a photo from a community theater stage. She had the expression of a person who has found a place to stand and would defend it. In the comments beneath, a woman wrote, "Thank you for being the way you are." It is a strange sentence if you think about it. It made perfect sense to me. I returned to Caldwell's Fix-It every time I came home. Sometimes I helped Mason replace a timing belt. Sometimes I sat on the bench and watched the way a man can make other people breathe easier by being the kind of person who believes the world can be put back together if you do the steps in the right order. Sometimes I asked him questions with more philosophy than mechanics in them. And sometimes he answered with a story about a radio that would only tune to the ball game if a certain penny was set on top. I never again asked to pull a sheet from a shape. I never again opened a cabinet without his permission. I learned that reverence can be a kind of boundary. You may want a verdict now. You may want me to tell you with certainty whether I am the same person I was before a season that has been almost entirely erased from the family albums. You may want me to declare that Mason Caldwell is a saint or a monster. You may want me to say which parts of a person can be replaced without changing the whole. I cannot give you that verdict. I can give you the details, and the details will have to be enough. There is a shop on the edge of a small town where a man fixes what he can. He has a room behind a door where the air is clean and the light is bright. Sometimes he repairs a thing by bending it back. Sometimes he replaces a part. Sometimes he builds back. And sometimes he decides he cannot. He lives with those decisions. So do the people who come through his door. I know this much about myself. I like the smell of oil. I like the click of a mechanism at the moment it remembers what it is supposed to be. I believe that when you put a world back together in the correct order it runs, though sometimes at a different beat. I remember being a boy who looked up at a man and learned how to name parts. I remember being a man who looked at another man and asked him to open a door. I live in a body that works and a mind that questions. I think that is as honest as I can be. If you drive past Caldwell's Fix-It on a Tuesday afternoon, you will see a bench where people wait. Maybe you will see a cat sleeping there, breathing in the shallow rhythm cats use when they have decided you are not a threat. You will smell coffee and oil. You will hear the bell over the door. You will not see everything. That is not the same as saying it is not there. I will leave you with this. When we call someone broken, what exactly do we mean? Do we mean they need help? Do we mean they frighten us? Do we mean they do not fit the shape we demand they fit? When we call something a repair, what debt do we take on to the person being repaired? What debt do we take on to the person who does the repairing? Is mercy the act of keeping someone as they were, or the act of making sure they continue, changed, at a tempo that lets them still recognize themselves? You have your own answers. You have your own doors that have not yet opened. You will decide which ones to unlock. If you want to know what I decided to keep going back, to keep asking questions, to keep learning the names of the parts. I decided to live with a click I may or may not hear. I decided that some bargains are made out loud and some bargains are made by where we choose to sit. I still sit on the bench when I am home. The wood knows my back. The town moves. The bell rings. Somewhere behind a door, a man turns on a light and asks the air to be honest. Just for a while. Invitation to the audience. If you have stayed with me this far, I am asking you to add your voice. In your life, where do you see the line between repair and replacement? When is intervention a mercy? And when does it edge into violence or injustice? Think about the decisions powerful people make, or the bargains ordinary people strike when they are desperate. Share your view in the comments. Take a stand. Tell a story from your town or your family. Do you believe we owe one another the chance to be put back together, even if the process changes us? Or do you believe some harms should be left uncorrected because the price of correction is too high? Your answers matter, and someone reading them might breathe easier because you spoke.